Enjoy this sneak peek at one of our Patreon bonus episodes.
All of our bonus content is available for only $1 a month.
Visit patreon.com/spoilers intended podcast.
Hello and welcome to a very special Patreon bonus episode of Spoilers Intended. Usually a podcast about series and films, but today we are talking about the technology purchases you regret the most. Yes. These are the buys you made and you're like, what a hunk of junk. Or why did I purchase this? It does nothing for me.
Yeah, this is good, but it's useless in my life.
It's totally not.
And it doesn't have to be electronic either. It can be
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything is technology.
Fire is a technology.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you want to stretch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you, the fire was the worst purchase. It just kept spreading.
It won't stop. Where's the receipt? Take it back.
Totally not coincidental that we're recording this shortly after Amazon Prime Days. Not at all. That's not at all related to each other. No, totally not.
Unrelated. Wait, Amazon Prime Day happened?
Oh, no. Andrew's like,
oh, the Luddite. We found the Luddite.
It's fine. There wasn't a lot of good deals.
He's like, any technology? Does it have to have electronics?
It's always like
in it?
all the really crappy ones.
Well, and it's people. Amazon does that thing where they've had it marked down forever. And then they mark it up,
and then they mark it down.
That's why I've got that Honey browser extension. You can see the price tracking.
Camel, yeah.
And you click it and you go, oh yeah, nah, dude, this was cheaper like 4 months ago. Like, yeah,
it'll go back down.
It will.
It will. Yeah. It sure will.
Anyways, tangent over.
On that note, I'm Steven.
I'm Andrew.
Andrew.
I'm Ryan.
Yeah, that's the outro, but we're doing it as the intro. Let's go.
Okay, let's talk about useless tech. Also, thanks to our patrons.
Huge shout out to the wonderful people who help us pay those hosting bills, keep the lights on, and keep creating madcap content like this.
Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much.
It sure does. I'm going to kick this one off.
Go for it.
With the most infamous piece of tech. If you have not experienced this piece of tech, then I can tell you right now, you either did not have a friend who you didn't want to play games with.
You didn't have a friend.
Now, hold on. Or
End of sentence.
Did not have a little brother, or you weren't the little brother. Because I'm talking about the little brother controller. That's right.
Oh, the Mad Cat.
The Mad Cat.
Oh, okay. I was like, a controller that controls your little brother? This existed? I would have ordered 20.
So... back in the day, right?
Oh, man, Mad Cat.
When you were a kid.
You're sending me on a spiral.
Oh, the see-through, the plastic felt terrible. So you couldn't, you got, an N64 and it came with one controller.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you need a second controller because the whole idea of the N64 is you could play with four.
But your parents are not going to spend the full money.
Your parent, you drag your parents to Toys R Us or Walmart or whatever, and they look at that, piece of plastic on the shelf. They're like, $50.
Yeah, they were pretty expensive.
Possibly cost $50.
This one's 15. The Mad Cat.
15. Yeah, it's got a turbo button, right?
And you're like, Dad, it's broken in the package. I can see from here.
And it's like the see-through plastic, and as soon as you hold it, you're like, well, this feels terrible.
So the Mad Cat's
it's so light. You're like, no.
The Mad Cat's N64 controller was kind of like, it looked more like a T than it did like the little trident or whatever.
That one. Yeah.
So it was a little bit easier to hold, but you still had to hold it like a normal N64 controller. Right. So it was pointless.
So I had a PlayStation Mad Cat's controller that was like, oh, man. Trying to remember what the gimmick was. It wasn't a turbo button. I mean, it had a turbo button.
Yeah.
But there was something else. It was right after the analog.
It had the switch on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was right after the analog sticks came out. Because, the PlayStation, when it launched, didn't have analog sticks. Came out with the dual.
Oh, yeah. Because then the dual stick was the PlayStation 2.
No, that was the launch. PlayStation 1 had it.
Oh,
it just didn't come out
at
launch.
I was never a PlayStation guy, so.
Yeah, so like PlayStation launched with just like a normal, just like the Super Nintendo controller. And then like, it was like a year later, they released the dual analog stick.
Instead of a $50 controller, they could charge $80 for the controller.
Of course, yeah.
I don't think it was that much.
It was expensive.
Well, no, but
it was
this
more.
was still around the time where I don't think there was any regulation on how much video game manufacturer or producers could actually charge.
Because
there was no, like, you could, like, for like Sega Genesis, you would buy like Garfield for like $85.
Right. Well, like I said, I remember buying Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo for $89 at Walmart
in like 1994.
Yeah, and then literally
like a $200 game.
Like a year later on PlayStation, buying Resident Evil for $49 because once CDs came out, that was the PlayStation advantage over N64.
Yeah,
was like you didn't have to buy the cartridge; you could just print it on a cheap CD, like with for the manufacturers or whatever.
Yeah,
but Yeah, it was a Mad Catz, but it was clear. Obviously,
they were always clear.
And it had the claw marks on the side. I remember that,
and it could like you would get like it's clear, but like a tinge of purple or red, or green.
But I just remember I had bought I had two analog stick controllers.
Yeah,
the Sony branded ones. They were great. And then I bought the Mad Catz because I can't remember why. I think I remember now. Quake on PlayStation 1 worked with the multi-port where you could have 4 players. And I had the multi-port, and we played Crash Team Racing and Quake.
But getting up to 4 controllers is expensive.
And so I bought a Mad Catz for that specifically. We went to my buddy Charles's house, and we had 3. I think like my 2, and then we went to Walmart, and I just bought that Mad Catz. And I remember anyone playing that, and I was like, I don't want to be on this one because the analog sticks were like hard plastic.
They're stiff and
they were terrible. They were not like, they didn't have the rubber on the tips, you know?
Because of Mad Catz specifically, I have PTSD about buying any third-party controllers ever.
And rightly so. I bought several Mad Catz throughout the years. I'm trying to remember.
I remember
they were all terrible.
Because every time you're looking at it, you're like, but that's like really cheap. I know, and I know I've been burned before, but they've probably gotten better.
They've got to have come along.
No. There's got to be a class action lawsuit somewhere that's keeping them from making trash again, right?
I just remember on the N64, I had the Mad Catz controller, and you had the turbo button.
Yeah,
playing Star Fox 64, which has got a little bit of a bullet hell feel to it.
A little bit.
Let's flick this bad boy on and just shoot. It crashes the game.
Oh yeah, it does.
it lags it out hardcore.
So much,
Oh yeah, it has no idea what to do with that amount of input.
So I've literally never had a game that actually worked with the turbo button properly.
No.
And it just
not really.
It's a gimmick. It's a gimmick.
It's a total gimmick.
Because the game is not intended to process.
It's not intended to receive that many commands in a second.
So, in the Super Nintendo era, and I'll piggy off of yours and do one of mine, I had the Turbo Touch 360. Now, the Turbo Touch 360 was
kinky.
Exactly. It was a turbo controller, so you had turbo buttons, and they made it for Super Nintendo and Genesis. I had the one for Super Nintendo. My cousin Luke had it for Genesis, and the D-pad was replaced with an octagon and a touchpad. So it was kind of like you remember the Steam box controllers, but way less sophisticated. So the problem with it was an octagon, so you had the 8-way directions, and then there was like a little indentation in the middle so you could know when you're centered on it. But then it was completely flat. It should have been like a curve, like a convex, thing where you can slide around, but it wasn't.
It was too early for that.
The idea was you're trying to do these hard moves with Zangief where you have to do a 360 and you don't want a whole arcade stick. You could just slide your thumb around it in a circle, and it's the same as having an arcade stick. And then the turbo buttons was, you got E-Honda or Chun-Li, just hold down that button,
There's lightning kicks or whatever.
It worked for that. Like the turbo button worked for Street Fighter. But the 360 thing was hot garbage. There was not enough tactile feeling under your thumb of what you were doing to do a fireball, to do a hurricane kick, to do any kind of like actual, Street Fighter move on that thing. And I spent, I can't remember. It was more than a Super Nintendo controller because it was like this fancy thing.
Yeah.
But that one, I can't remember what company made that. I'm gonna look that up. I don't think it was Mad Catz. Watch it be.
No, Mad Catz was definitely like an early 2000s.
Tomio, a subset of Mad Catz. No.
The Turbo Touch 360 stunk. It was one of those where like you get it and you think, well, I just gotta get used to it. And then after like a week of playing Street Fighter Solid, I'm like, this stinks. There's nothing good about it. Get it away from me.
So probably my first like real poor controller experience was when we were on Windows 95, I think. No, 98. And this was when I was first playing Dark Forces. And I begged my parents to get me a flight stick for a first-person shooter. And
wait, what?
Yeah, because like
flight stick for what, you playing Descent? What are you talking?
No, this was just for Dark Forces, and I you don't know any better because you're like, oh, a flight stick would be a lot better for this.
More precise.
Yeah, it was not. It was absolutely terrible, and it had 2 buttons on it, and obviously you need more buttons than that, so you still had to have your hand on the keyboard while you played.
So I'm holding up a picture of the Turbo Touch 360.
I've seen one of those before.
But you see how the left side, you could do like the 360 easier?
It looks like an inflatable pool.
It felt like it too. Yeah, it was basically a garbage inflatable pool.
The plastic doesn't even look very good. I mean, obviously it's old now in that photo, but ugh.
It didn't have like the matte finish. It was slick. Anyways.
Oh yeah.
Did ever
your hand starts sweating and it tries to squirt out of your hand?
Since we're on the subject of bad controllers, did you guys ever actually have a Dreamcast or play on a Dreamcast?
Yeah, my friend
for
had one.
extended periods of time.
No, but it didn't do great in the palms.
Yeah, in the palms and the thumbstick because it didn't have the rubber like it did on like the PlayStation or N64.
And it had the grooves, but they were hard plastic grooves, and that wasn't enough.
Oh man,
to keep
you just get blisters directly on your thumb.
We're talking about controllers. What's your favorite controller?
Oh, GameCube, 100%.
Right?
Definitely not GameCube. I would probably go.
I'm gonna say Xbox 360.
No, absolutely not. None of the Xbox controllers. I might say controversial. The PS5 controller, because it's like the most evolution of a lot of.
A lot of people say the PS5 controller.
It's very good.
The PS5 controller is incredible.
It's really good. It's really ergonomic and it's weighty enough to where it feels good in the hand versus like.
It's like I've never owned a PlayStation. Well, no, I take that back. I did have a PlayStation 3, but I never played any games on it.
You played Grand Theft Auto with me.
You're right. I did. I lied.
Confirmed liar. Straight to jail. No, yeah. The original PlayStation controller.
It's been 10 years, man.
Pre-analog sticks, the original OG PlayStation controller is fantastic for side scrollers and stuff.
Bet, yeah.
Because it's like...
Well, because you have the really big stick.
Well, it's not even the stick. It's the D-pad's immaculate. Probably the best D-pad that's ever existed on a controller. It was the OG first generation PlayStation. But then the Super Nintendo, had the curves because the NES was just a square that cut into your wrists. The Super Nintendo added the curves. The PlayStation added the wrist holds.
Yep.
So like that, once that hit, I was like,
I loved seeing the innovation, every evolution, iteration. But honestly,
what's your GameCube? Huh?
I love the GameCube. Now I will say the GameCube, at least maybe just because my hands are just big or whatever. They do, like if I'm playing Smash Brothers for a substantial amount of time, they do run into where they're rubbing like on my middle fingers.
Oh,
on the first
right there on that knuckle. Yeah, I get that.
So
it's the corner on the back there.
So basically what I did was I just got some moleskin and I put it there to stop that.
So Andrew skinned an alive mole.
Yeah,
just for his freaking control.
But no, I really like the GameCube controller because all of the button layout is exactly right where you need it to be, and I really love the C stick.
See, that's why I don't like it.
For Smash Brothers.
For Smash Brothers.
Sure.
Yeah.
But like outside of that use case, I remember my cousin Corey had a GameCube. And so we had this situation where when that era of gaming was happening, I had a PlayStation 2. My cousin Corey had a GameCube, and my brother had an original Xbox.
Oh, nice.
All in the same house at my grandmother's house. And we lived there together.
Man,
so, like, for that era, I didn't have to buy any, and they didn't, so we shared everything.
You just rotated.
We all had it hooked up to one TV. And so
the life.
It was. I look back and I'm like, that was the golden era for me. It was like that era because we could just play whatever we wanted, and we experienced what everybody had. It was great. But the GameCube, what I was gonna say is like, it took me a long time to get used to it because all the buttons are so different sized. But it was the triggers I never fully fell in love with, like the clickiness of them.
Yeah, the triggers. Well, because you had to pull them in and not down.
Right. Yeah. It felt
because basically the pivot point was in the center and not up on the top.
It wasn't like a lever. It was like a.
Now that's the thing. I'm not saying that it's the perfect controller. It's just my favorite. Yeah, it's just my favorite.
Yeah. Steven?
I'm going to say this
Xbox.
is Wiimote. Original Xbox, baby.
Xbox.
Oh, God.
He's like the chunky boy.
The hubcap with like buttons stuck on it.
Freaking batarang that this thing was.
It's bigger than most game systems.
It is. Now it's bigger than the GameCube itself.
Well, whenever your buddy no-scope domes you, then you can just throw it at them and they die.
Let me tell you, this is the best weapon ever.
That was a preview of one of our Patreon bonus episodes.
If you like what you heard, you can gain access to all of our bonus content for just $1 a month.
Visit patreon.com/spoilers intended podcast.